A reading from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 13, beginning at verse 24. Jesus put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to someone who sowed good seed in his field. But while everybody was asleep, an enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat, and then went away. So then the plants grew and bore grain, and it was then that the weeds appeared as well. The slaves of the householder came and said to him, "Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? Where then did these weeds come from?" He answered, "An enemy has done this." The slaves said to him, "Then do you want us to go and gather them?" But he replied, "No, for in gathering the weeds, you would uproot the wheat along with them. Let both of them grow together until the harvest. And at the harvest time, I will tell the reapers, 'Collect the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn.'" Then he left the crowds and went into the house. And Jesus' disciples approached him, saying, "Explain to us the parable of the weeds of the field." He answered, "The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed are the children of the kingdom. The weeds are the children of the evil one, and the enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. Just as the weeds are collected and burned up with fire, so it will be in the coming of the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will collect out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all evildoers, and they will throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Let anyone with ears listen." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So we're living in stressful times. That's not a surprise to anybody. In a world that we would not have expected 6 months ago, and a world that we hardly recognize. And it's hard to imagine what the next 6 months might look like, let alone a year from now. So it's a time that we need to be supportive of each other, although from a distance. Our regular routines have been disrupted, if not completely at a standstill. I have one or two of friends that have admitted to me that sometimes they think they're in danger of losing their minds. Well, I've done my best to assure them that, well, actually they're fine, and that they need to be nice to themselves. And for the most part, I admit, I think I'm doing okay. Well, until a couple of weeks ago. I've not really had much of a routine to go by, except for sorting and packing, but it's not really mattered that the days seem to blend into one another. But then one morning, about a week and a half ago, about 6 o'clock in the morning, one of the cats walked across me. Of course, it woke me up a bit. And I realized I had no idea at all what day it was. I knew it was early morning, and I knew where I was. But what day of the week it was, I actually didn't have a clue. And, well, to be honest, that was a bit disconcerting. My first guess was, well, it must be a Tuesday because the executor was at the house the day before, and that was normally a Monday. But if that was the case, then it meant that somehow I missed church on Sunday, which was unlikely. I think I would have remembered Doug's sermon, Warren's sermon, the cathedral in Toronto, my friends in northern Quebec, and my girlfriend in New Zealand. How could I have missed all of them? I don't think I could have. Well, reason came into play, and I knew there was no reason for panic. All I had to do was either turn on my phone or the computer, and all would be well. All would be right with the world again. Well, sort of, as much as it could be these days. Well, one of the things I've had the opportunity to do with the isolation is to be outside and mucking about in the gardens. None of them had had much work done to them for a couple of years, so they were in pretty bad shape. So earlier in the spring, I got going on them. I went to town and dug them out and started over. I saved some of the perennials, but I got as much of the dead stuff out as I could and tried to make sure that the weeds were gone. Well, I have to say that at times I wasn't sure what was friend or foe, so I dug away and replanted, and I took my chances. And I'm pleased to say that with the transplanting and the planting of new plants, it's been rather successful. Nothing yet has died, and most seem to be thriving. That's really rewarding, and I'm pleased to say the gardens look pretty nice. But in spite of all that digging and weed pulling that I did a couple of months ago, somehow the weeds continue to still spring up. And where on earth are they coming from? Well, I spoke with a friend who's a master gardener, and she laughed at me, and she said, well, obviously you didn't get all the weeds out. Well, thank you for that. That was helpful. So I keep an eye on the gardens, and I pull out the weeds as they appear. And I was very pleased when a neighbor a few doors down stopped one evening walking his dog and commented on how much he enjoyed seeing the gardens thrive and what a good job I was doing. And I had to confess. I said, actually, I'm playing. I don't know what I'm doing. And he said he was even more impressed. So, okay, that's good. But then I had to laugh at myself, which is one of my favorite things to do. I transplanted some hosta into a container, and there was still some room, so I put in what I thought was ground cover, because then the plants would drape over the barrel and make it look really pretty. It's been growing along merrily, and I've been watering it and keeping an eye on other weeds. But now those other plants have flowered, and yeah, they're a weed. So the dilemma now is, should I leave it? Should I pull it? They're pretty, so maybe I should just leave them. And doesn't that kind of sound familiar with our gospel reading today? So in our gospel, it's the problem of the wheat and the weeds together. And I have a much better appreciation now of how difficult it can be to tell one from the other, and realize the wisdom of letting them both grow together until harvest, because to do otherwise could actually damage the good plants. Fortunately, the hosta are doing very well. But there's two other factors to this story that help shed some light on Jesus' words. And that's the first one is that there's a plant that mimics wheat in the Holy Land, and it's only towards the end, near harvest time, that you can see the difference. One grows straight up with the seeds of the wheat, the other one flops over. And that's the only way to tell the difference between the two. So when the servants come to the master and say, hey, what happened here? Didn't you sow good wheat? It's only because nearing harvest that they would realize what had happened. The second factor is a cultural understanding for their time of honor and shame. Feuds would be carried out for generations. In a society and in a small town where everyone knows each other's business and each other's strengths and each other's failings, the feuds often provided entertainment for the neighbors. And that would partly explain the fascination for us of TV shows like Family Feud or soap operas. So if your grandfather had felt slighted by someone for some reason, that slight would be carried on to your parents, to you, to your children, your grandchildren, and so on and so on. So whoever went and planted the weeds probably thought that this would bring shame because it looked like the farmer wouldn't have known enough to buy good seed. And that, of course, would be embarrassing. It would look like he didn't know what he was doing when he told the servants to leave the plants alone. It would seem reasonable to pull the weeds up to make sure the wheat didn't get choked or starved of nutrients. But this, of course, is where the tables are turned. First of all, the farmer knows the strength of the seeds, of the purity of the wheat, and that it will be okay in spite of the weeds. Secondly, at harvest, when both are harvested, the farmer asks that they be put aside in bundles, and they become fuel for the colder season that's coming. It's actually a win-win for the farmer. And the good twist for the listeners of Jesus' parable, and they would have understood this. It would get their minds going because of the unexpected outcome. Grist for the mill, so to speak. Well, the world that we're living in right now has a lot of controversy and speculation, a lot of misinformation, and a lot of issues that are so easily dividing us. It's really hard to listen to all of the reports and decide what to pay attention to, what's reliable and what should be ignored. And there's all kinds of opinions floating around because it's all too easy to pass judgment on those who don't see things the way we do. My opinion is the one that matters, of course. I think there's a movie title that kind of sum this up for us. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Well, the good news for us is that God isn't done yet. God knows the big picture, even when, or I would say even especially when, we don't see it. We're in a world that presents challenges to the order of things. We even see how Mother Nature is bipolar these days and throwing curves at us, like the tornado that touched down in Sturgeon Lake a couple of weeks ago. What we are called on to do as faithful believers is just that, to keep the faith, to have confidence in our God who created all that we have and all that we are out of love. Jesus' parable reminds us that we're not the ones to judge, and that the judgment will happen at the end of the harvest. That's not our job. In the meantime, of course, we still live with the issues of good and bad, compassion and hatred, peace and violence. It's frustrating to realize I'm not the one in control. But if I'm honest, that's actually a good thing. The shrewd and savvy farmer knew that it was to his benefit to leave the wheat and the weeds well enough alone. He was no longer shamed, and this backfired on the enemy. The one who sowed the weeds is now the one who is shamed. And the farmer knew that all will be well. So when all of our worlds seem upside down and backwards, we know that it is God who is our constant. Our faith gives us space to believe still that we are loved, that we can be assured that we have security, and in the end, all will be well. Amen.